Lila Moreno balanced a tray of steaming coffee cups, careful not to wobble as she weaved between tables at the Hawthorne Café. The morning crowd was loud, a constant hum of chatter and clattering cutlery, but she focused only on keeping the cup steady. She caught the edge of the counter too sharply, and one tipped, spilling coffee across the polished wood. A gasp rippled through the nearest table, and Lila froze, cheeks burning, hands trembling as she grabbed napkins. Cameron Hawke's laughter cut through the noise, sharp and mocking, and she turned toward him instinctively. He sat near the center of the cafe, black tailored suit gleaming under the lights, silver watch catching the sun, eyes calculating. "Careful there, sweetheart," he drawled, voice dripping with condescension. "Wouldn't want to ruin my morning with your grace." Lila swallowed hard and knelt quickly to blot the spill. "I'm so sorry, sir," she murmured, voice soft but steady, each word carrying tension she refused to release. Hawke leaned back, smirking, and said, "You know, in my world, people who spill coffee like that usually don't have much ambition. Ever think of doing something bigger than serving lattes?" The words cut deeper than any hot coffee could, but Lila kept her voice even. "I'm happy with my work. It's honest and it matters," she said, careful not to rise to his bait. Hawke's smirk widened, almost predatory. "Honest, sure. But happiness doesn't buy respect, does it? Money does. Influence does. Ever consider that maybe you're a little beneath the finer things?" A few patrons tittered nervously, sensing tension, while Sophie, Lila's colleague, whispered from behind, "Ignore him, Lila. Just do your job." Lila's jaw tightened. She set the tray down on a side table with care and returned to Hawke's table, holding the small white envelope containing the $1,000 tip he had pressed into her hand. His gray eyes followed every movement, expectation glinting sharply. "I can't accept this," she said, locking her gaze on him, voice steady. "Not like this." Hawke's expression darkened in confusion and irritation before amusement returned. "Oh, I see. You're one of those people. Moral high ground types. Very noble of you. Refusing money you didn't earn. I applaud the theatrics." "I didn't earn your respect either," Lila replied quietly. "And it can't be bought." The word struck harder than any tray ever could. Hawke's smirk faltered for a heartbeat, replaced by a cold, assessing look. Lila straightened, breathing controlled, waiting. Around them, the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Hawke's hand twitched toward the envelope, then fell back. He leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "You're bold. I'll give you that. Dangerous even in a way I like. But boldness without leverage is reckless. You should be careful who you decide to offend." Lila's jaw tightened. "I've spent enough time careful. Today I'm just me." Hawke leaned back with a slow, calculated laugh. "This is going to be fun." Before she could respond, Sophie returned balancing two trays. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing between them. "Fine," Lila said quickly, forcing a smile she didn't feel, but inside, a spark had ignited, one that refused to die quietly. She had learned people like Cameron Hawke assumed everyone would fold. Today, she hadn't. The rest of her shift passed in a blur, movements deliberate and careful, never servile, each glance from Hawke feeling like a test she met with quiet defiance. That evening, stepping outside for a breath before her next shift, she sipped coffee and tried to enjoy the calm street, but it shattered when a sleek black BMW rolled to a stop directly in front of the cafe entrance, blocking the doors. A uniformed driver opened the passenger door with precision, and Hawke emerged, sunglasses hiding his expression, radiating control. Patrons scattered nervously, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Lila's stomach knotted as she glanced at Sophie and then back at him. "Good morning," he said, smooth and almost pleasant, but with an edge that cut. "I thought we should continue our discussion." "I don't think there's anything left to discuss," Lila said, stepping back, instinctively holding her tray close. Hawke tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You really think a single refusal stops me? Or are you just entertaining yourself?" From the alley beside the cafe, a woman appeared, sharply dressed, exuding authority. Vanessa Kerr, a lawyer Lila had met briefly through her mother, stepped forward. Lila, Vanessa said, firm but warm, step aside. We need to talk. Hawk raised an eyebrow, surprise flickering. Oh, and who are you? Someone who's going to make sure you don't overstep, Vanessa replied, pulling a photograph from her briefcase. Lila squinted. Roberto Moreno, her grandfather, stood beside a woman she recognized immediately, Clara Hawk, Cameron's mother, in a cluttered workshop filled with scattered tools, smiling faintly at the camera. Hawk's smirk stiffened, his usual confidence wavering. That's old news, he said smoothly. Vanessa's voice cut sharply through the tension. Old news that proves a foundation, one your empire is built on, was stolen. Lila's heart pounded. Cameron's eyes flicked between Vanessa and Lila, the smirk still on his lips but thinner now, forced, as though holding back the cracks. The air between them felt like glass about to shatter, sharp and fragile. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lower, carrying the venom of a man who had never been challenged in public. You think you found a weakness, he said, each word deliberate. But you're both mistaken. This is the world I built, not your grandfather, not some workshop relic. Me. Vanessa didn't move, her gaze unwavering. You built on sand, Mr. Hawk. That foundation was never yours to claim. Lila's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to speak but her throat felt tight, her hand pressed against the cool glass door behind her. She forced herself forward anyway, voice shaking at first but steadying as she pushed through the fear. My grandfather died with grease on his hands and debt in his pocket, while your father took his work and turned it into an empire. I served coffee to you this morning, and you mocked me for not having ambition. But it wasn't ambition that made you powerful. It was theft. For a moment, Cameron just stared, unreadable. Then he laughed, short and harsh, startling the bystanders still lingering on the sidewalk. A waitress lecturing me on empires, he muttered, shaking his head. This city has truly lost its sense of hierarchy. He turned sharply to the black BMW, snapping his fingers. The driver soon inhaled, opened the door, but his eyes, cool and unreadable, lingered on Lila for a heartbeat longer than they should have. Cameron stopped halfway inside the car and looked back, the smirk returning, though this time it looked brittle. Enjoy your moment. It won't last. The door shut with a muffled thud, the car gliding into the street, leaving behind silence and exhaust fumes. Lila exhaled shakily, realizing only then how tightly her fists had been clenched. Sophie darted out of the cafe, her face pale. Lila, what was that? He's dangerous. Everyone knows it. I know, Lila whispered, though the fire in her chest refused to dim. Vanessa placed the folder of documents carefully back into her briefcase, her voice steady but carrying urgency. This was just his opening move. He'll try to scare you, maybe even bury you in threats or offers. But don't back down. We have more than he wants to admit. More? Lila asked. Vanessa nodded, eyes flicking toward the street. Blueprints. Letters. Records his father never meant to see daylight. What we showed him today was enough to rattle him, but we're holding the real weight until the board of Hawk Industries has no choice but to listen. The rest of the day blurred into fragments. Whispers from customers who had witnessed the confrontation, sympathetic nods from strangers who offered quiet encouragement, Sophie hovering protectively at her side. But when the cafe closed, and Lila finally sat down in the dim back office, she felt the exhaustion hit. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, the countless times she had urged Lila to keep her head down, to not stir trouble. Yet, something had shifted. She could no longer imagine stepping quietly aside. That night, Vanessa arrived at her apartment, carrying more files. They spread them across the kitchen table, papers overlapping, ink faded with age but still legible. Lila's breath caught as she traced her grandfather's handwriting, curved lines, precise notations, tiny sketches that matched the memories she carried from childhood evenings in his workshop. He always drew little falcons in the margins, she whispered, pointing to the corner of a page. Said they represented freedom. It was his mark. Vanessa leaned closer, her brows furrowing. That explains something. She slid a separate file forward, an internal memo from decades ago, part of Hawk Industries' early archive. On the margin of a prototype sketch, the same falcon symbol was faintly visible, partially erased. Before Lila could respond, a knock sounded at the door. She stiffened, exchanging a wary glance with Vanessa. When she opened it cautiously, Ethan Hale stood in the hallway, the driver from the BMW, hat in hand. His expression was tense, but not hostile. "I shouldn't be here," he said quickly, glancing over his shoulder as though someone might be watching. "But I need to warn you. Cameron doesn't lose gracefully. He'll come after you with everything he has." Vanessa stepped between them, her tone sharp. "Why should we believe anything you say? You work for him." Ethan's jaw tightened. He tugged his collar slightly, exposing the falcon tattoo on his neck. "I saw that mark when I was younger. Your grandfather drew it on blueprints pinned in his shop. I don't know all the details, but I know this. What Hawk Industries built didn't start with them. And if you're really pushing this fight, you'll need someone on the inside." Lila's heart pounded. "Why tell us now?" "Because I owe a debt," Ethan replied simply, his eyes flicking toward the papers on the table. "And because some things shouldn't stay buried." He shifted his weight uneasily. "Don't trust Cameron. Don't trust his promises, his threats, or his silence. If you think today was the worst of it, you're wrong. It's only beginning." With that, he stepped back into the hall, pulling his hat low as he disappeared down the stairwell. Lila closed the door slowly, her hands trembling as she turned back to Vanessa. The lawyer's face was unreadable, but her voice carried both gravity and resolve. "Then we prepare. We're not just fighting a man, Lila. We're fighting a machine that's been running unchecked for decades. But now, finally, it's showing cracks." Lila looked down at the scattered blueprints and sketches, her grandfather's falcon marks staring back at her like ghosts waiting for justice. She clenched her fists, her fear tangled with something sharper. "Then let's break it wide open." The following week blurred into a rhythm of urgency. Vanessa moved with the precision of someone who had orchestrated takedowns before, contacting investigators, securing testimonies, and arranging a hearing before Hawk Industries' board of directors. Each day brought another box of records unearthed from archives and warehouses, all carrying fragments of Roberto Moreno's genius buried under different names. Lila spent nights poring over the documents, tracing the falcons, reading the margins where her grandfather had scribbled late-night thoughts like prayers. For the first time, she felt the weight of his legacy pressing not as grief, but as armor. When the day came, the city's financial district felt colder, taller. The glass tower of Hawk Industries gleamed like a blade against the morning sky. Protesters had already gathered at its steps, workers, engineers, even old colleagues of Roberto who had long kept silent. They held cardboard signs, some hastily painted with falcons, others demanding truth. Cameras flashed, news anchors spoke into microphones, and Lila walked through them with Vanessa at her side, her thrift store coat buttoned tight, her chin raised. She felt Sophie's presence somewhere in the crowd, a small figure waving in quiet solidarity. Inside, the air was different, sterile, controlled. Security guards lined the lobby, their polished shoes squeaking faintly against marble floors. The elevator ride was silent except for the hum of machinery, and Lila's reflection in the chrome walls showed a woman she barely recognized, no longer the timid waitress ducking insults, but someone standing on the cusp of reckoning. The boardroom stretched wide, a cathedral of glass and steel, the city sprawling beneath it. 12 directors sat at the table, expressions measured, their pens poised over leather-bound folders. Cameron Hawk stood at the head, immaculately dressed, his smile wide but his eyes cold, calculating. Beside him, Ethan Hale lingered at a respectful distance, dressed as staff, his face unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cameron began smoothly, his voice filling the room. "We're here today to address allegations. Spurious, unfounded, and frankly insulting claims that certain foundations of Hawk Industries were misattributed. I assure you, this is nothing more than opportunism." Vanessa stepped forward before the directors could murmur. Her briefcase snapped open, and she began laying out documents with calm precision. "What you call opportunism, Mr. Hawk, the law calls evidence. These are blueprints predating Hawk Industries Incorporation, carrying Roberto Moreno's signature and symbol. These are contracts, unsigned, unpaid, detailing stolen work. And these, she spread photographs across the glossy table, are letters between your father and government contractors, acknowledging Moreno's designs while omitting his name from every patent. The directors leaned forward, whispers breaking their silence. Cameron's jaw tightened. This is ancient history, he snapped. My father built this company from the ground up. These scraps prove nothing. Lila's heart hammered. She forced her voice into the air, steady but burning. They prove everything. My grandfather died believing his life's work was forgotten. But you've built your empire on his back. You mocked me for serving coffee, Mr. Hawk. Yet it's you who's been serving lies for decades. Gasps rustled through the room. Cameron's mask slipped, his smile dropping into a snarl. You insignificant. But Ethan spoke then, his voice cutting through like a blade. It's true. All eyes turned to him. He stepped forward, the falcon tattoo visible at his collar. I worked for Hawk long enough to see the patterns. The blueprints, the marks, your father ordered them hidden. I've seen the original workshop logs, the erased credits. I swore loyalty once, but not to theft. Not anymore. The board erupted, voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. Cameron spun on Ethan, fury blazing. You traitor! No, Ethan said quietly, meeting Lila's gaze across the room. Just someone who's done staying silent. Vanessa seized the moment, her voice rising over the clamor. The law is clear. Misappropriation of intellectual property at this scale carries consequences. The Moreno estate, represented by his sole heir, Lila Moreno, has claim not only to recognition, but restitution. The falcon has returned, and it won't be buried again. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside the glass. The board members exchanged long, weighted glances. Finally, the chairwoman, an older woman with steel-gray hair and a measured gaze, spoke. Mr. Hawk, these allegations are grave. Effective immediately, we will commission an independent investigation. Until then, your authority as CEO is suspended. Cameron's face blanched, then flushed with rage. You can't do this to me. This is my company. It was never yours, Lila whispered, though the words carried farther than she expected, echoing into the stunned room. Security moved quietly, respectfully, but firmly, escorting Cameron out as he shouted threats and promises of revenge. His voice faded down the corridor, leaving only the quiet buzz of shaken men and women at the table. Lila stood frozen, the weight of it washing over her, the years of silence, the humiliation of being dismissed, the ache of her grandfather's absence. Vanessa placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You did it, she murmured. But Lila shook her head. No, we just started it. When they stepped back outside, the crowd surged, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. The sunlight struck her face, blinding and warm. Someone shouted her name, others chanted Falcon, Falcon, Falcon. For a heartbeat, she faltered, overwhelmed. Then she raised the blueprint she had carried folded in her coat, unfolding it high above her head. The crowd roared, voices blending into a wave that rolled up the glass tower. Ethan emerged behind her, shielding her from the press, his voice low. They'll come after you harder now. Are you ready for that? Lila lowered the blueprint slowly, her fingers trembling, but her eyes were steady. I've been underestimated all my life. Maybe it's time that stops. Vanessa smiled faintly, her lawyer's composure softening for just a moment. Your grandfather would be proud. The city stretched out before them, steel, glass, and shadows. But in the middle of it stood Lila Moreno, no longer the silent girl behind a counter, but a woman carrying a legacy back into the light. And though the fight ahead promised storms, she felt the falcon at her back, its wings wide, its shadow stretching across an empire that would never again erase his name. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little courage today, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel.